Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're digging into some really interesting source material one of you sent us. It's an audio recording, actually. And our job is to unpack what it tells us about a huge topic.
That's right. We're looking at the global auto industry, what's really happening under the hood, so to speak.
Exactly. Who's positioned for the future? Why do some companies seem, well, stuck in low gear while others are accelerating?
And we'll pull out some pretty sharp observations from this source, things about different corporate cultures, predictions about who might dominate down the road, and maybe some surprising reasons behind these big shifts we're seeing.
Right. Our goal here is to make sense of this complex material for you. Pull out the key insights, the important nuggets, so you get a clearer picture fast. Okay, let's get into it. So the source kicks things off with a pretty striking view on the strengths in parts of the Chinese auto industry right now. What jumped out?
Yeah, it's quite a statement. The source basically feels they're way ahead, maybe 5 years plus, on vertical integration.
Meaning they make more of their own stuff in-house.
Exactly, core components, that kind of thing. Not relying so much on external suppliers. The source also said their electronics and drive-by-wire are pretty good and self-driving. Real close to Tesla, apparently.
Wow. And the build quality.
Described as to die for. So really high praise there.
And that seems linked to another point the source makes about just speed.
Yes, fundamentally. The observation is they can simply do it faster, get new models out the door much more quickly.
Okay, so the flip side then, why are Western companies, according to this source, slower? What's holding them back?
Well, the source points squarely at internal friction. Hurdles within the company. It mentions things like some lawyer that says you can't do that, or some accountant that says, oh, we got to save money. A focus on cost cutting, maybe over innovation sometimes.
And there's that interesting bit about the engineers, too.
Right, this idea that in some places you might get ahead by not doing anything, sticking to the proven path.
Which connects to that phrase that really stood out, didn't it? That idea of a decision being car good for the car, bad for my career.
Exactly that. The source argues that in some company cultures, saying no to a change, even if it makes the car better or more profitable, might feel like the safer career move for the individual. It's a pretty stark picture of how internal structures can sometimes stifle progress.
And leadership plays a role here, too, according to the source. Finding the right mix of skills and drive isn't always easy.
Yeah, the source suggests that getting that perfect combination of, experience, past success, education, and the ambition to push things forward, it doesn't usually come in the same package in these environments.
Okay, this idea of internal challenges leads us to another big theme of the source, consolidation. A big shakeout coming. The Xpeng CEO has mentioned, saying China has over 90 EV brands, needs to get down to maybe 7.
That's one number floated, yeah. But the source brings up a counterpoint, or at least some history. Apparently, Chairman Xi back in 2019 wanted the number of all car companies in China, which was like 650, then cut down drastically to 300, then 150 over 4 years.
So a massive reduction planned even then.
Right. And the source's take on that number 7 is that it's just not enough for a market the size of China. Their prediction is more like globally we'll end up with maybe about 20 car companies in total.
20. How does this consolidation happen? According to the source, what's the mechanism?
It's pretty simple economics, really. As companies produce fewer cars, their cost per car goes up, they become less competitive, and eventually, the source says, they just disappear.
And there's a historical parallel drawn here, isn't there, to the U.S. auto industry?
Yes, exactly. The source reminds us, there were way over 100 U.S. car companies once. Ford, GM, they bought up lots of smaller ones. But even brands within those big families like Pontiac, Oldsmobile, some Chrysler models, they eventually vanished too. Because even being part of a bigger group couldn't sustain them if the volume wasn't there. The source sees that same pattern playing out globally now.
Okay, so shifting to the present day, the source doesn't hold back on assessing specific companies. Who's seen as being in trouble?
Yeah, some clear flags are raised. Nissan is described as being in a lot of financial trouble. Volkswagen, obviously in trouble. In fact, the source calls VW the one that's in the most trouble.
Wow.
And Stellantis apparently has some real issues, too.
Any potential lifelines mentioned? Like for Nissan?
The source suggests Nissan could stabilize, maybe by getting in bed with a company, implying, a merger or a major partnership.
Okay, but it's not all doom and gloom. Who's doing better or making positive moves?
The Koreans, Hyundai, and Kia are seen as being in good shape, doing well. And Honda is described as pulling itself up by bootstraps, kind of like Toyota often does.
And Toyota itself. There was a specific mention about them avoiding a problem.
Right. The source believes Toyota averted a strategic calamity, apparently by promoting someone referred to as Saku, who was seen as a really smart kid at the time, into a key role.
Interesting. What about the big U.S. players, Ford and GM?
The source's take is that they made a couple of big mistakes.
Okay, mistakes. Why? What's the reasoning given in the source?
Well, the source offers a perspective here. It suggests they might have listened too much to certain political discussions around fossil fuels, drill, baby, drill, and that sort of thing. And the opinion in the source is that they shouldn't have listened entirely to that, and it caused them to delay important work on electrification they should have been doing earlier. Again, that's the source's viewpoint on why they stumbled.
Got it. And Tesla, what's the assessment there?
The source is quite clear. Tesla's issues aren't seen as being about the cars themselves, it's more about the politics that surround Elon. The author even adds a personal note, as a former shareholder, saying they'd prefer Elon just focused on making cars and trucks and stayed out of politics.
So a lot of moving parts.
Definitely. The overall sentiment from the source about right now is everybody's in a state of flux. Things are very unsettled.
All right, let's look further out, say 10 years. The source makes a really bold prediction for the top automaker globally. Who is it?
BYD. Unequivocally, the source says, no question about it, they will be the biggest.
No question about it. That's incredibly confident. Why? What makes the source so sure about BYD?
Well, several key strengths are highlighted. First, that vertical integration again. They make everything, buses, trucks, cars, their own batteries. They're not just assemblers. Second, the source stresses that they invent stuff. Real innovation happening there. And crucially, they're described as not hampered by any financial needs. They're just huge. A powerhouse.
Okay, BYD at number 1. Who else does the source see in that top tier?
Toyota is expected to be there too, a consistent player.
And what about Tesla? Still in that top 3 mix in 10 years.
That's where the source is less certain. The phrase used is hard to say. It's described as maybe a little bump in the road for Tesla right now, and their future position depends on a lot of different things.
Which sounds like it connects back to those non-product issues mentioned earlier.
It seems implied, yes, that the politics factor creates uncertainty around their long-term top-tier status. Geely is also mentioned as being pretty big, but maybe not quite cracking that top 3.
Okay, let's circle back to how companies like BYD managed to innovate and move so quickly. The source dives back into the human element, right? Specifically engineers.
Absolutely. The source attributes BYD's ability to create so many models very directly to having a shitload of engineers, a huge number. The source author mentions personally being involved in training thousands there, more than they'd seen anywhere else.
And this contrasts sharply with the approach seen elsewhere, according to the source.
Yes, very sharply. There's this anecdote shared about Western accountants looking at engineering teams and saying things like, my calculations show that we should only have 2 engineers. Wanting to cut a team of, say, 18 down to 2, just based on some calculation, ignoring the actual work.
And this highlights a core belief in the source material about where value is created.
Right. The source argues very strongly that the only place you really make money long-term is in engineering. Because if you start with a bad design, no amount of fixing it on the factory floor will make you truly competitive.
And they use the parts count example.
Exactly. If I've got 4 parts and you got 18 parts, I'm going to win. Fewer parts mean lower cost, easier assembly, better quality, fewer things to break. It all starts with the design.
So it's a fundamental difference in philosophy. Are engineers a cost center to be minimized?
As the source suggests happens often in the West, cutting engineers right at the beginning of a program.
Or are they the engine of innovation and profit?
Which seems to be the view attributed to BYD. There's another anecdote about someone named Sandy Sun at BYD. Her question wasn't, how do we cut engineers? It was where we can find more engineers. Even asking about recruiting from the U.S. because they couldn't get enough engineers for all their projects.
That's a telling contrast.
It really is. The source author also touches on their own experiences, mentioning high-level meetings in China, even being near Chairman Xi at one point, and contrasts that level of, let's say, access and perceived importance of the industry at the top with not having had similar interactions with U.S. presidents. It hints at potentially different national priorities or focus.
And there was an analogy from a different industry, too. Appliances.
Yeah, a quick mention of helping the appliance maker Midea go from number 3 to number 1 globally. The key. presenting directly to the top leadership for guys that were owning or running it. It seems to reinforce that idea. Engineering-led strategy needs buy-in and prioritization right from the very top to work.
Okay, one last major prediction from the source. This one's about the overall market size.
Right. The source predicts the global car market is going to shrink. Not grow, shrink.
Why? What are the reasons given for that?
Primarily demographics. Quite bluntly, nobody's having kids, and everyone wants a dog. Fewer people forming traditional families means potentially lower long-term demand for new cars. The source also agrees that automated driving, maybe leading to more shared mobility, could also reduce overall car ownership somewhat.
And how does this shrinking market connect with the rise of certain companies?
Well, the source argues the Chinese automakers are clearly intent on disrupting markets, Western ones, and their own domestic market. So in a shrinking global pie, they're positioned, according to the source, to take more market share.
Which puts even more pressure on the smaller players.
Exactly. It loops back to that consolidation point.
Right.
If you're an OEM selling maybe 1 million cars or less in a shrinking market where powerful players are taking more share, well, the source believes you'll struggle and likely disappear.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this deep dive. We've looked at, well, stark contrasts in corporate culture and speed, especially comparing some Chinese companies with Western ones, according to the source. We've heard predictions of massive industry consolidation driven by simple unit economics, a look at who's perceived as struggling or improving right now.
Yeah, and that really strong prediction for BYD becoming #1 based on their vertical integration, innovation, and scale. Plus, the critical role of engineering often undervalued, according to this source.
And finally, this overarching idea of a shrinking global car market due to demographics and maybe changing ownership models.
And remember, while we're talking cars, these themes are bigger, aren't they? They're about global economic shifts, different ways of approaching innovation, how much organizational culture and what leadership prioritizes really matters for success. You can sort of see the potential long-term impact, as the source suggests, if short-term cost-cutting overshadows investment in core things like engineering.
Definitely. So here's maybe a final thought for you to take away, something stemming from the source material. Think about that part good for the car, bad for my career idea. What does that kind of thinking mean for innovation, not just in cars, but in any large organization you might know or work in? Or consider what the future of getting around really looks like if the market shrinks, ownership changes, and the centers of manufacturing power continue to shift globally. Lots to think about there.